One quiet decision can erase years of connection in a single moment. No shouting, no dramatic goodbye, no final argument that everyone remembers. One day the messages stop, the calls go unanswered, and a person who once cared deeply simply disappears from someone's life. To outsiders, it feels sudden, confusing, even cruel. Many assume the empath has become cold, selfish, or unforgiving. After all, aren't empaths supposed to be the people who always understand, always forgive, and always stay? That belief sounds comforting, but it misses one of the most important truths about empathy. The people who care the deepest are often the ones who carry emotional pain the longest without letting anyone see it. What looks like an unexpected ending is usually the result of countless silent moments that were ignored, dismissed, or quietly endured. Long before an empath walks away, an invisible emotional journey has already begun. Every broken promise, every feeling that went unheard, every repeated disappointment leaves a mark. Most of those marks remain hidden because empaths often choose peace over conflict, understanding over confrontation, and patience over immediate reaction. This is exactly why their final decision surprises almost everyone around them. The real story does not begin with the goodbye, it begins months or even years before that moment. Modern psychology offers fascinating insights into emotional exhaustion, compassion fatigue, boundary formation, and the hidden cost of constantly carrying other people's emotions. These ideas reveal that cutting someone off is rarely driven by anger alone. More often, it grows from emotional depletion, lost trust, and the painful realization that caring for everyone else has come at the expense of caring for themselves. In this video, you'll discover why empaths give far more chances than most people realize, why they often stay in unhealthy relationships long after others would have left, what invisible emotional shifts happen before they finally detach, why their silence is frequently misunderstood, and why the smallest event can become the final turning point after years of emotional buildup. You'll also learn the difference between healthy boundaries and emotional walls, why many people completely misread an empath's decision to leave, and what really happens inside their mind after they choose distance over another painful conversation. Some of these psychological patterns are rarely discussed, yet they explain countless relationships that seem to end without warning. By the end of this video, the behavior that once seemed confusing may suddenly make perfect sense. Stay with us until the very end because the final insight could completely change the way you view empathy, forgiveness, emotional strength, and the quiet power of walking away. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy thoughtful psychology, relationship insights, and deep explorations into human behavior, make sure to subscribe and join us for more videos that uncover the hidden truths behind the way people think, feel, and connect. One of the biggest misunderstandings about empaths begins with a compliment that sounds positive but can become deeply misleading. People often describe empaths as endlessly kind, endlessly patient, and endlessly forgiving. While these qualities may exist, they are often mistaken for something they were never meant to be. Kindness is confused with weakness. Compassion is confused with permission. Understanding is confused with accepting every form of behavior without limits. Society tends to celebrate people who always give, always listen, and always make room for others. The person who sacrifices their own comfort to keep everyone else happy is often praised as selfless. But this creates an unrealistic expectation. Once someone is known as the understanding one, others begin to believe they will continue understanding forever. They assume there is no point where enough becomes too much. They believe an empath's emotional capacity has no ending. That assumption is not only unfair, but it also hides what empathy actually does inside the human mind. Empathy allows a person to notice emotional details that many people overlook. They recognize changes in tone, expressions, energy, and unspoken feelings. They naturally pick up emotional signals that others may ignore. This heightened awareness helps them connect deeply with people, but it also comes with a hidden cost. Every disappointment feels heavier because it is fully experienced. Every conflict lingers longer because it is carefully processed. Every emotional burden adds weight that cannot simply be switched off. The same sensitivity that allows an empath to comfort others also makes emotional pain more difficult to escape. Caring deeply is not an unlimited resource. It requires emotional energy, and emotional energy eventually becomes exhausted when it is constantly given without being restored. Because empaths often understand what someone else is going through, they are less likely to react quickly when they are hurt. Instead of immediately becoming angry, they search for explanations. Maybe that person is stressed. Maybe they had a difficult childhood. Maybe they never learned healthy communication. Maybe they are struggling with fears they cannot express. This ability to see multiple perspectives is one of empathy's greatest strengths, but it can also become one of its greatest traps. Looking for reasons behind someone's behavior can delay necessary decisions. Instead of asking whether a relationship is healthy, the empath keeps asking why the other person acts this way. Their focus stays on understanding rather than evaluating. They spend so much time explaining another person's actions that they slowly stop paying attention to their own emotional condition. From the outside, it appears as though everything is fine. Friends, family members, and even partners may believe the relationship is stable because there are few dramatic confrontations. Yet beneath the surface, an invisible emotional record is quietly growing. Emotional pain rarely arrives as one giant event. More often, it arrives in small pieces that seem harmless on their own. One broken promise may be forgiven. One careless comment may be ignored. One forgotten commitment may be explained away. Each moment appears too small to justify ending an important relationship, but emotional experiences do not exist separately inside the mind. They connect with one another. Every disappointment joins the ones that came before it. Every moment of feeling unheard strengthens an existing wound. Every repeated pattern quietly changes the way trust is experienced. This gradual process is known as emotional accumulation. It is similar to water slowly filling a container. Each drop seems insignificant, but eventually the container reaches its limit. No single drop caused the overflow by itself. It was the accumulation that mattered. Relationships often work in exactly the same way. One difficult conversation rarely destroys trust. Repeated emotional neglect slowly changes how safe the relationship feels. Because empaths dislike unnecessary conflict, they often process these experiences internally. Rather than confronting every painful interaction, they spend hours thinking about it alone. They replay conversations, they question whether they misunderstood, they wonder if they are expecting too much, they criticize themselves before criticizing anyone else. This internal processing creates another illusion for the people around them. Since the empath is not constantly expressing frustration, others assume there is no frustration at all. Silence becomes mistaken for satisfaction. Calm behavior becomes mistaken for emotional comfort. Many people never realize that the empath has already spent countless nights trying to solve problems without involving anyone else. By the time concerns are finally expressed, those concerns have usually existed for a very long time. Repeated disrespect has a unique effect on trust because trust rarely disappears all at once. Instead, confidence slowly changes into uncertainty. An empath may still care deeply about someone while no longer feeling emotionally safe with them. This creates an exhausting inner conflict. Their heart continues hoping, while their experiences continue warning them. Every new disappointment becomes connected to previous memories. The mind starts recognizing patterns instead of isolated mistakes. At first, harmful behavior feels accidental. Later, it begins to feel predictable. Predictability changes everything, because once a pattern becomes clear, hope begins competing with reality. The empath still wants to believe things will improve, but experience quietly whispers otherwise. This is where emotional exhaustion begins taking shape. Emotional exhaustion is not simply feeling tired after a difficult day. It is the gradual depletion that happens after carrying emotional weight for far too long without relief. Every difficult conversation requires energy. Every act of forgiveness requires energy. Every attempt to understand another person's pain requires energy. When these efforts are not balanced by mutual care, emotional reserves slowly disappear. An empath may continue smiling, helping, and encouraging others while privately feeling empty. Since they have spent so much of their life supporting other people, they often become skilled at hiding their own exhaustion. Even close friends may never notice the emotional burden growing inside them. One reason this hidden struggle continues is that empaths genuinely believe people can change. Hope becomes a powerful force. Every apology feels meaningful. Every promise sounds sincere. Every brief improvement seems like proof that lasting change is finally happening. This hope encourages them to give another chance and then another after that. They remember the person's potential instead of focusing only on current behavior. They remember acts of kindness alongside painful experiences. Their memories refuse to become completely negative because empathy naturally keeps searching for balance. They do not want to define someone by their worst moments. This generosity of perspective is admirable, but it can also extend relationships that are no longer emotionally healthy. Understanding another person's struggles is not the same as accepting repeated harmful behavior. This difference is often overlooked. An empath may completely understand why someone avoids responsibility, struggles with communication, or reacts defensively. Understanding explains behavior. It does not erase its impact. Emotional wounds still exist regardless of the reasons behind them. Yet many empaths continue believing that if they simply become more patient, more supportive, or more understanding, the relationship will eventually become healthy. They quietly accept responsibilities that were never theirs. They begin carrying emotional burdens that belong to someone else. Slowly, compassion transforms into overfunctioning, where one person keeps investing while the other contributes very little in return. Psychologists sometimes describe a state called compassion fatigue, where continuous emotional caregiving begins reducing a person's emotional resilience. Although the term is often used in healthcare and caregiving professions, similar patterns can appear in close relationships. Constantly supporting someone through repeated emotional cycles eventually becomes draining. The empath still cares, but caring starts feeling heavy instead of natural. Conversations that once inspired hope begin creating anxiety. Instead of looking forward to interactions, they quietly prepare themselves for disappointment. They notice themselves becoming emotionally tired before every meeting or phone call. This shift is subtle, and because it develops gradually, they may not even recognize it immediately. Patience is one of the most admired human qualities. Yet patience is often misunderstood. True patience allows space for growth while respecting personal limits. Endless patience without boundaries slowly becomes self-neglect. Every relationship requires emotional reciprocity. Both people must contribute to trust, respect, and care. When only one person continues adapting, forgiving, and understanding, the relationship quietly loses balance. The empath may not notice this imbalance at first because giving feels natural to them. Over time, however, repeated forgiveness begins changing into emotional depletion. Forgiveness is healthy when it leads to healing. It becomes harmful when it repeatedly excuses patterns that never change. Then comes the moment that confuses everyone watching from the outside. Ironically, this moment is rarely dramatic. There is usually no unforgettable argument or shocking betrayal that suddenly transforms everything. The event itself may appear surprisingly ordinary, a forgotten promise, another dismissive comment, yet another disappointment that resembles dozens before it. Outsiders often focus on that final event and wonder why such a small issue ended the relationship. They never see the years standing behind that single moment. The final straw is rarely powerful because of what it is. It becomes powerful because of everything that came before it. By then, the emotional container has already reached its limit. The last drop simply makes the overflow visible. The deepest change happens quietly inside the empath long before anyone notices external distance. Expectations begin disappearing. They stop waiting for different behavior because experience has replaced hope with acceptance. They no longer rehearse conversations in their mind because they already know how those conversations will end. The emotional investment that once fueled endless patience slowly fades away. This is not driven by hatred. It is driven by exhaustion. Emotional detachment begins before physical separation. Their body may still be present, their words may still sound polite, and their routines may remain unchanged, but internally they have already started letting go. By the time they physically leave, much of the grieving has already happened in silence. That is why everyone else experiences the ending as sudden, while the empath experiences it as the final step of a journey that quietly unfolded over months or even years. One of the most confusing parts of an empath's decision is not that they leave. It is that they often leave without giving one final explanation. To the person left behind, this silence can feel unfair. Questions begin to appear immediately. Why didn't they say anything? Why didn't they ask for one more conversation? Why didn't they explain exactly what went wrong? From the outside, silence can look careless or even cruel. Yet inside the mind of many empaths, that final conversation has already happened hundreds of times. They have replayed it during sleepless nights. They have imagined different words, different reactions, and different outcomes. Long before they physically leave, they have already spent countless hours trying to solve the relationship in their own thoughts. The decision to remain silent is often not the absence of communication. It is the result of feeling that communication has stopped creating change. Every previous conversation that ended with promises but no lasting action slowly teaches the empath that another discussion may only repeat the same pattern. Eventually, speaking begins to feel less like a solution and more like reopening an old wound that never truly healed. Emotional burnout plays a major role in this stage. Burnout is often associated with work, long hours, and physical exhaustion, but relationships can create a similar kind of emotional depletion. When someone spends months or years carrying difficult conversations, explaining their feelings, offering understanding, and hoping for improvement, they eventually reach a point where even talking feels exhausting. The problem is no longer finding the right words. The problem is believing those words will make any difference. Every difficult conversation requires emotional energy. Every disagreement asks the nervous system to prepare for disappointment once again. At some point, the empath realizes they no longer have enough emotional strength to repeat the same cycle. They are not choosing silence because they enjoy watching someone else suffer. They are choosing silence because they no longer have the emotional resources to keep defending feelings that have already been expressed many times before. This is why people are often surprised when they hear an empath say, "I already told you." Those words rarely refer to a single conversation. They refer to months of small signals that were overlooked. The empath may have expressed disappointment through honest conversations, changes in behavior, reduced enthusiasm, or emotional withdrawal. They may have become quieter, less expressive, or less available long before they finally walked away. These changes were forms of communication, but they often went unnoticed because they were not dramatic. Many people only recognize communication when it arrives as conflict. Empaths frequently communicate through consistency, patience, and gradual changes rather than explosive arguments. When those quieter forms of communication are ignored, the final silence becomes easier to understand. It is not the first message, it is simply the last one. There is also an important difference between protecting peace and seeking revenge. Revenge focuses on causing pain. Protection focuses on preventing further harm. From the outside, both actions may look similar because they involve distance, but the intention behind them is completely different. Someone seeking revenge often wants the other person to suffer, regret, or feel guilty. Someone protecting their peace is focused on creating emotional safety for themselves. Their attention shifts away from changing another person and toward rebuilding their own emotional stability. This distinction matters because many people mistake boundaries for punishment. They assume that distance is meant to hurt them personally. In reality, an empath who has reached emotional exhaustion is often thinking less about revenge than anyone realizes. Their energy has been consumed by survival, not retaliation. Silence becomes less about sending a message and more about creating enough space to breathe again. Self-preservation is a concept that is sometimes misunderstood because it lacks visible drama. Movies often portray self-protection as dramatic confrontation or bold declarations, but real emotional self-preservation is often much quieter. It can look like declining another conversation that has already happened many times. It can look like no longer explaining emotions that were repeatedly dismissed. It can look like stepping away before resentment completely replaces compassion. Silence in this context becomes a protective boundary rather than an emotional weapon. The empath is not trying to erase another person's worth. They are trying to prevent further damage to their own emotional health. After spending so much time caring for someone else's emotional needs, they finally recognize that they also deserve the same care. Despite this decision, leaving is rarely emotionally easy. One of the greatest misconceptions is that empaths instantly feel relief the moment they walk away. Relief may exist, but it usually arrives alongside grief. They remember the beautiful moments just as clearly as the painful ones. Human memory naturally preserves emotional complexity. The mind does not erase every happy experience simply because the relationship ended. Instead, both realities exist together. They remember laughter, support, kindness, and shared dreams, while also remembering disappointment, neglect, broken trust, and emotional exhaustion. This creates a painful emotional conflict because both sets of memories are true. Letting go of someone does not require forgetting the good parts. Sometimes the good memories make leaving even more difficult. Guilt often becomes another quiet companion after the relationship ends. Empaths naturally question themselves because they spend so much of their lives considering other people's emotions. Instead of immediately blaming someone else, they often begin by blaming themselves. They wonder whether they gave up too soon. They ask whether they should have explained things one more time. They question whether they misunderstood someone's intentions. Even after making a healthy decision, self-doubt can continue for weeks or months. This internal questioning reflects the same empathy that kept them invested for so long. Their compassion does not disappear simply because the relationship has ended. Another struggle appears when loneliness replaces constant emotional responsibility. Relationships, even unhealthy ones, create routines. Daily conversations, familiar habits, and shared experiences become part of ordinary life. Once those routines disappear, the silence can feel uncomfortable. Missing someone does not automatically mean leaving was the wrong decision. The human brain often misses familiarity, even when familiarity included emotional pain. This is why many people briefly consider returning to relationships that were damaging. They are responding to emotional habit as much as emotional attachment. The empath may miss the person while simultaneously recognizing that the relationship itself was no longer healthy. Those two emotions can exist together without contradicting each other. The deepest internal conflict often exists between compassion and self-respect. Compassion encourages understanding, forgiveness, and patience. Self-respect asks for honesty, boundaries, and emotional safety. Healthy relationships allow these two values to work together. Unhealthy relationships force them into competition. For a long time, the empath chooses compassion. Eventually, they realize compassion directed only toward others slowly becomes neglect directed toward themselves. Learning to value self-respect does not eliminate kindness. Instead, it creates balance. They begin understanding that protecting their own emotional health is not an act of selfishness but an act of responsibility. Healing usually begins only after real distance is created. As long as harmful patterns continue repeating, the nervous system remains focused on survival rather than recovery. Emotional distance provides something many empaths have not experienced for a very long time: quiet. Without constant disappointment, they begin hearing their own thoughts more clearly. Without continually managing another person's emotions, they rediscover interests, goals, and parts of themselves that had slowly faded. Recovery rarely happens overnight. Some days bring confidence, while others bring sadness. Yet little by little, emotional energy begins returning because it is no longer being spent on endless emotional repair. Unfortunately, people observing the situation often misunderstand everything that happened. Since they only witness the ending, they naturally judge the ending instead of the years leading up to it. The empath may suddenly be described as cold, unforgiving, or emotionally distant. Ironically, these descriptions usually appear only after the empath finally stops sacrificing their own emotional needs. People who benefited from unlimited patience often struggle when patience becomes healthy boundaries. The change feels harsh because they became accustomed to unlimited access. What they experience as rejection may simply be the first time the empath has chosen themselves. There is also an important difference between emotional numbness and emotional clarity. Emotional numbness occurs when feelings become disconnected or difficult to access. Emotional clarity is something very different. Clarity means understanding what is healthy and what is harmful, even when emotions remain strong. An empath who chooses distance may still care deeply. They may still wish the other person well. They may still feel sadness, compassion, and love. Yet they also clearly recognize that caring does not require continued closeness. Their emotions remain alive, but their judgment becomes stronger than their hope. This clarity is often mistaken for indifference because people expect visible emotion to continue forever. They assume that if someone no longer argues, cries, or pleads, they must no longer care. In reality, emotional clarity often appears calm precisely because the hardest emotional work has already happened privately. Perspective shapes every relationship story after it ends. Each person remembers different moments. Each person explains events through their own experiences. Someone who felt abandoned may genuinely believe the ending came without warning because they never noticed the quiet warnings that came before it. The empath remembers years of emotional effort that others barely recognized. Neither memory necessarily feels dishonest. Human perception naturally focuses on different experiences. This is one reason relationships can end with two completely different stories about what happened. Still, it is also important to recognize that not every cutoff is automatically healthy. Distance can be protective, but it can also become avoidance if it is used to escape every difficult emotion. Healthy boundaries are different from emotional walls. A boundary allows healthy people to enter while limiting harmful behavior. An emotional wall keeps everyone outside, including those who have done nothing wrong. Someone recovering from repeated emotional pain may temporarily build walls because they feel safer than vulnerability. While understandable, permanent walls can eventually prevent meaningful connection. The goal is not to stop trusting forever. The goal is to become wiser about where trust is placed. Emotionally healthy empaths gradually learn a lesson that changes future relationships. Instead of waiting until years of emotional buildup force them to disappear, they begin expressing boundaries much earlier. They speak honestly before resentment grows. They address repeated problems before emotional exhaustion takes over. They understand that protecting a relationship sometimes requires uncomfortable conversations instead of endless silence. Earlier boundaries create opportunities for healthy change. If the other person responds with respect, the relationship grows stronger. If they repeatedly ignore those boundaries, the empath recognizes the pattern much sooner, reducing the need for a sudden and painful ending later. Healthy communication cannot guarantee every relationship will survive, but it often prevents years of silent suffering that eventually leave both people wondering how everything fell apart. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. An empath rarely walks away because of one bad day, one careless sentence, or one simple mistake. What appears to be a sudden ending is usually the final result of countless quiet moments that no one else noticed. While others only see the goodbye, the empath has often been carrying the weight of that decision for months or even years. Every ignored feeling, every broken promise, every repeated disappointment slowly adds another layer until emotional exhaustion becomes impossible to hide. By the time they finally leave, much of the grieving has already happened in silence. This is why repeated chances can sometimes be misleading. From the outside, it looks like everything has been forgiven, but inside, emotional energy is slowly being used up. Every new chance is often given with a little less hope than the one before. Eventually, there comes a point where staying no longer feels like kindness. It feels like abandoning yourself. That is the moment many people misunderstand. They see distance as punishment, when in reality it is often protection. They see silence as revenge, when it is frequently the only way an emotionally exhausted person can finally find peace again. Perhaps the most important lesson is that healthy relationships are not built on endless sacrifice. They are built on mutual respect, honest communication, and boundaries that protect both people. Boundaries are not walls designed to keep love out. They are guidelines that help love survive. When boundaries are ignored for too long, even the kindest heart can become emotionally drained. Learning to speak up early, listening with genuine care, and respecting each other's emotional limits can prevent many relationships from ever reaching a painful breaking point. The quietest goodbye is rarely the quickest decision. By the time an empath walks away, the conversation has often been happening inside them for much longer than anyone else realized. Sometimes the strongest act of compassion isn't staying. It's recognizing the moment when protecting your own peace is no longer selfish but necessary. That choice may look cold to those who only witness the ending, but to the person who lived through the entire journey, it is often the beginning of healing. Now we'd love to hear your perspective. Have you ever been the empath who quietly walked away after giving too many chances? Or have you been on the other side, only realizing what was happening after someone was already gone? What do you think people misunderstand most about empaths, boundaries, and silent goodbyes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else understand their own. If you found this video meaningful, don't forget to like it, share it with someone who may need to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel for more deep insights into psychology, relationships, emotional healing, and human behavior. Thank you for watching, and until our next video, take care of your mind, protect your peace, and never underestimate the quiet strength of knowing your own worth.